Now, I'm interested in your interest in Kay Thompson. It's almost an addiction, Sam. So many details in your book. So I have to say, what prompted you to do this book?
It did become a bit of an obsession, you're right. I grew up on the Eloise books. My older sisters introduced them to me and read them to me as stories, bedtime stories and all. And when I got older, I saw Funny Face, the musical film with Audrey Hepburn and Fred Astaire, of course, and this cyclone of a woman who blows through that movie playing the fashion magazine editor, and she opens the film with Think Pink, which has become kind of a fashionista anthem. And I was like, who is this woman, and why have we not heard more about her, and why doesn't she have more movies, why didn't she do more Eloise books? And I just got more and more interested about her as years went on. And in the 1990s, there was a 40th anniversary of Eloise, and she was still alive at that time, but very much a recluse. She was living at her goddaughter's, Liza Minnelli's place.
Hard to imagine her as a recluse.
I know it.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of press, and Vanity Fair did a profile of her, but she didn't grant an interview. She was very reclusive, and there were still major pockets of mystery about this woman. And so when she passed away in 1998, I decided to embark on researching her life and really getting to the bottom of all the mystery and putting it all together.
Well, you know, I'm curious, then, did you ever meet her?
I never met her, no.
It's amazing to me how many biographers and do a really splendid job, and yet have never met the person that they write about, although obviously you talked to Liza and all the people that she was
I ended up talking to over 200 people who knew and worked with her. So in some ways, I almost feel like I had met her. Boy, I wish I had. But it was quite an amazing journey putting this all together. When I first started, I did it sort of as a hobby. I'm a filmmaker.
I was just going to say, you've directed films. You were the executive producer of one of my all-time, co-executive producer, one of my all-time favorite films, and that was Gods and Monsters.
Yes, yes.
Sir Ian
McKellen and Lynn Redgrave
and
Brendan Fraser. It was a charmed movie.
When you were and that was, you were co-executive producer.
I was one of the producers on that one.
But you have been mostly a director.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, I mean, was this sort of in between directorial gigs?
It was. This started out as a hobby that I would do when I was out of work between gigs, and this is what kept me out of trouble. And and I just thought, well, who's going to want to read a book about Kay Thompson? I may have to publish this, self-publish it, or out of my garage or whatever. And so I didn't have a deadline. I just kind of did it when I had time to do it. And it grew, and it grew, and it grew. And every person I interviewed turned into 5 more people, because they would say, oh, you got to talk to so-and-so. And Michael Feinstein, for instance, became a tremendous support, and he opened so many doors for me and was so helpful. But it just ended up taking, I'm embarrassed to say, about 11 years, all in all, off and on. Yes. And but it's finally come to fruition.
Well, the detail is so amazing. And as I said before we were on the air, when you talk about her early days in radio.
Yes.
And I sort of, when radio was sort of dying out before television became really big, you know, I did a lot of radio. I would no more know which, I did so many shows that I couldn't keep, and yet you knew what she was on and who was on with her, and then you talked to the people who actually worked with her. I mean, it was just phenomenal to me.
It was really, it was kind of a fortunate window of time, because when Kay died in 1998, many of the people that I've interviewed over the past decade have passed away.
You couldn't do it now.
I almost feel like half the people I interviewed are no longer with us. And so it was really almost the last opportunity to record that history. And I spent weeks and weeks and weeks in libraries going through microfilm, piecing together, going in the newspapers and finding out the names of the radio shows and finding little mentions of Kay in columns and things.
And little towns, aside from the big cities.
Yes, yes.
Did you go to these little towns?
No, but I luckily, about halfway through my research, there's a great website called newspapers.com that now have a lot of newspapers that are defunct and were just on microfilm. They now have it searchable, so that really opened up a lot of doors for me there. Yeah. But But yeah, it was a lot of
She
digging.
had so much influence on the stars at MGM, even
Well,
before she was actually, before she was entertaining, before she did the nightclub act, which we'll get to.
Yes.
Judy,
absolutely.
everybody.
Well, she started out in radio in the 30s and became a major star there. And she got her taste of stardom, which she loved. But then, in the 40s, she took a job behind the scenes at MGM as the head of the vocal department. And there, she was the vocal coach, vocal arranger, vocal doyen, vocal guru to Judy Garland, Frank Sinatra, Lena Horne, every major star who was in a musical there. She was the one who was preparing them and preparing the arrangements and deciding what was right for them and how to show them off best. Not only that, but when a star didn't have a great voice, like Lucille Ball or even Angela Lansbury, she would be the one to find the voice that would provide the singing voice for them.
Interesting.
And then she'd be on the set to make sure that Lucy was lip-syncing properly and credibly. She'd be right by the director and saying, okay, now, you're over-enunciating or lip-syncing too much.
Yeah.
And so she really was sort of the wind beneath all these stars' wings at MGM, and she kept hoping that they were going to discover her and put her in a movie. That was her sort of secret desire, although not that secret. And she got very frustrated because when she would prepare all these great arrangements, she'd come in and perform them for the producers and everything, and they go, "That's great, Kay. Now, who can we find to sing it on the screen?" And she'd, bite her tongue and sort of bide her time. Mm-hmm. And hoping that someone was going to discover her, and it just wasn't happening. So in 1947, she chucked it all, quit MGM, and formed her own nightclub act called Kay Thompson and the Williams Brothers, which I know you're familiar with.
I certainly am. As I told you, Marshall Robbins, his father was Jack Robbins, and even though we were underage, certainly couldn't drink, and didn't. We got into Ciro's and got this great table. I mean, absolutely ringside. I'll never forget Kay Thompson and the Williams Brothers. Never. And of course, that's Andy Williams. He's the best known of all the Williams brothers, although they all went on. But this was a tremendous act.
It really was. And they were the Beatles of the nightclub circuit. I mean, they were they became this overnight sensation. They were the highest paid in the world, and they broke records in every city they went to, and played London and Paris. And I mean, they just were an absolute dynamic act. And it was the first time that something like this had been done in nightclubs. Up until that time, singers would stand at a microphone stand and the band would be behind them, and it would be all very sort of subdued. And Kay wanted to have choreography and be able to dance all around the stage. She came up with the innovation of hanging microphones from the ceiling, which had never been done in nightclubs. This was something that she took from Hollywood studios with the boom mics. And so literally, Kay and the Williams Brothers would get their own ladders and be climbing up and hanging these things, and the people at the nightclubs who own the nightclubs were like, "What the hell are you doing? What is all this about?" Well, they had to have hands free to do this incredible choreography that they were doing, which, by the way, was co-choreographed by Bob Alden, who was the great choreographer at MGM.
All right, now, Liza Minnelli has brought it back with her tribute, really, to her mother.
That's right.
I mean, her godmother, actually.
Her godmother.
It's not really about Judy, although Kay Thompson had a tremendous impact on Judy's career and the way she performed. But it obviously meant so much to Liza that she was determined, and part of her show is a recreation of Kay Thompson and the Williams Brothers. Now, you are one who was called in to sort of be the person, the consultant as to how to do this. Now, how did that happen?
Well, there's almost no footage of Kay Thompson and the Williams Brothers. When they started in 1947, television was just barely in its infancy.
Right. Yeah.
And in 1952 or something like that, they appeared on the Kate Smith Show, and there's about a 20-second clip that you can get a glimpse of what they were like. And it is quite astonishing. I mean, it's like an Olympic thing. They're tossing Kay in the air, and she's landing, but that's all there is. So Liza and her choreographer, Ron Lewis, who also choreographed and directed her show, they wanted to see the photographs that I had of them performing, and I have hundreds of photographs. And you can get a lot of inspiration from looking at these crazy gyrations and configurations that they would be doing on stage. So Liza invited me to come see some of the shows that she was working on, kind of in workshop, and she would go to different places with her show and try out some of the numbers. But it was still all being developed to work its way to Broadway. And so they ended up, she and Ron came to my house and sat in my living room for 3 hours going through books of pictures, and I made a whole bunch of copies for them, and so it sort of became an inspiration.
Well, obviously you were very inspirational, because that show that Liza does, or did at the Palace, won a Tony, right?
It won the Tony.
And that's the highest award you can win in New York.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to return to you in just a second, Sam Irvin, talk more about Kay Thompson and you, but first,